Picture this scene for just a moment. A polished mahogany boardroom on the 47th floor of one of Manhattan's most prestigious corporate towers. 12 of the wealthiest executives in the country sit around a table worth more than most people's homes. The tension in the room is so thick you could cut it with a knife because the company is bleeding money and someone's head is about to roll. But here's where this story takes a turn that nobody in that room saw coming. The man who would ultimately save this billion-dollar empire wasn't sitting at that table. He wasn't wearing a designer suit or carrying a leather briefcase filled with quarterly reports. No, he was standing quietly in the corner wearing a pressed white jacket, holding a silver tray of sparkling water. His name was Marcus Ellington. He was 63 years old, and for the past 27 years, he had been the invisible man. The butler, the one who poured the coffee, the one who cleaned up after their celebrations, the one who heard every single secret whispered in those hallowed halls but was never expected to speak. Until the day someone made the mistake of challenging him with 5 words that would change everything. If you can speak to the board, I'll step down. What happened next would become one of the most legendary moments in corporate history and a powerful reminder that the people we overlook are often the ones we need the most. This is the incredible true story of Marcus Ellington, the butler everyone ignored who took the floor and brought an empire to its knees before lifting it back up again. To understand the magnitude of what Marcus Ellington accomplished that day, we need to go back to the beginning. We need to understand who this man really was and how he ended up in that corner holding that silver tray while billionaires argued about numbers he understood better than any of them. Marcus was born in 1961 in a small town called Meridian, Mississippi during one of the most turbulent periods in American history. His father worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table, and his mother cleaned houses for wealthy white families on the other side of town. From the time he could walk, Marcus understood that the world was divided into 2 kinds of people, those who were seen and those who were invisible. His parents fell into the latter category, and for most of his early life, so did he. But there was something different about Marcus, something that burned inside him like a quiet flame that refused to go out no matter how many times life tried to extinguish it. He was brilliant, not just smart, but genuinely brilliant in a way that his teachers couldn't ignore even when they wanted to. By the age of 12, he had read every book in the local library. By 15, he was solving calculus problems that his high school teachers couldn't understand. And by 18, he had earned a full scholarship to Columbia University in New York City to study economics and business. For a young black man from Mississippi in 1979, this was nothing short of miraculous. His parents wept with joy. His community celebrated him as a symbol of hope. And Marcus himself believed with every fiber of his being that this was his ticket out of invisibility forever. He was going to prove to the world that he was somebody. He was going to shatter every ceiling, break every barrier, and build a legacy that would make his parents proud. But life, as it often does, had different plans. Marcus excelled at Columbia. He graduated summa cum laude with honors in economics and was immediately recruited by one of Wall Street's most prestigious investment firms. His future seemed limitless. His dreams seemed within reach. And then, in one devastating moment, everything came crashing down. During his first week at the firm, Marcus discovered evidence of a massive financial fraud being orchestrated by one of the senior partners. Millions of dollars were being funneled into offshore accounts while investors were being told their money was safe. As a young idealist who still believed in justice, Marcus did what he thought was right. He reported the fraud to the authorities. What he didn't anticipate was the power and influence of the people he was going up against. Within days, his name was destroyed. The firm painted him as a disgruntled employee who had falsified documents to cover up his own incompetence. Newspapers that had once celebrated his achievements now printed stories questioning his character. Doors that had once been open slammed shut in his face. And just like that, Marcus Ellington became invisible again. The next few years were the darkest of his life. Unable to find work in finance, he took whatever jobs he could get. He drove taxis. He worked construction. He cleaned office buildings at night while everyone else slept. The brilliant economist who had graduated at the top of his class was now mopping floors and emptying trash cans. But here's what makes Marcus's story different from so many others who have been beaten down by an unfair world. He never stopped learning. During those long nights, pushing a mop across marble floors, Marcus would listen to audiobooks about business and economics. He would study the Wall Street Journal that executives left behind in conference rooms. He would analyze company reports that ended up in recycling bins, teaching himself things that business school never covered. He wasn't just surviving. He was quietly, invisibly, preparing for something. He just didn't know what it was yet. Then, in 1997, Marcus got a job as a server at a private club in Manhattan that catered exclusively to the ultra-wealthy. It was here that he caught the attention of Gerald Morrison, the CEO of Harrington Industries, one of the largest manufacturing conglomerates in the United States. Gerald was impressed by Marcus's attention to detail, his discretion, and his almost supernatural ability to anticipate needs before they were expressed. He offered Marcus a position as his personal butler at the company's headquarters. The salary was good. The benefits were excellent. And Marcus, now in his late 30s with few other options, accepted the offer. For the next 27 years, Marcus Ellington served Harrington Industries in a capacity that no one truly understood. On paper, he was simply the butler. He managed the executive dining room. He oversaw the hospitality staff. He ensured that every glass was polished, every napkin was folded, and every visitor felt like royalty. But in reality, Marcus was something far more valuable. He was a silent observer with a photographic memory and a genius-level understanding of business that no one suspected he possessed. He attended every board meeting in his capacity as server and heard every strategic discussion. He poured coffee for executives who debated billion-dollar acquisitions without once acknowledging his presence. He stood in corners while consultants presented reports filled with errors that no one else caught, but that he could identify in seconds. Over 27 years, Marcus accumulated more knowledge about Harrington Industries than any single person in the company. He knew which divisions were profitable and which were hemorrhaging money. He knew which executives were competent and which were coasting on connections. He knew about the accounting irregularities that auditors missed and the supply chain inefficiencies that cost millions annually. He knew everything, but no one ever asked him. Because who asks the butler anything beyond "would you like more coffee?" By 2024, Harrington Industries was in serious trouble. The company that had once been a titan of American manufacturing was now bleeding money at an alarming rate. Revenue had declined by 40% over 5 years. 3 major product recalls had damaged the brand's reputation, and a series of disastrous acquisitions had left the company drowning in debt. The man who had hired Marcus all those years ago, Gerald Morrison, had retired a decade earlier and passed away shortly after. His replacement, a brash young CEO named Preston Whitmore III, had been brought in to turn things around, but had only accelerated the decline. Preston came from old money. His grandfather had been one of the original investors in Harrington Industries, and his family still held a significant stake in the company. He had graduated from Harvard Business School with honors, but had never actually built anything himself. He was the kind of man who believed that pedigree was a substitute for performance, and that being born into the right family meant you automatically deserved to be at the top. Under Preston's leadership, Harrington Industries made one catastrophic decision after another. He fired experienced executives and replaced them with his fraternity brothers. He cut corners on quality control to boost short-term profits. He ignored warnings from engineers and accountants alike because he believed he knew better than everyone else. And throughout it all, he treated the staff with barely concealed contempt, especially Marcus. To Preston Whitmore III, the butler was less than furniture. He was a relic of an older time when companies actually cared about hospitality and service. On more than one occasion, Preston had suggested eliminating the butler position entirely as a cost-cutting measure. The only reason Marcus still had a job was because some of the older board members, who remembered Gerald Morrison fondly, insisted on maintaining traditions. But even they rarely acknowledged Marcus's existence beyond a cursory nod when they arrived for meetings. Nobody knew that every time Preston made a disastrous decision, Marcus documented it in a personal journal. Nobody knew that Marcus had been building comprehensive analyses of what was wrong with the company and exactly how to fix it. Nobody knew that the invisible butler had spent 27 years becoming the foremost expert on Harrington Industries, while everyone else was too busy looking past him to notice. The crisis came to a head on a cold November morning when the quarterly results were released. The numbers were catastrophic. Revenue was down another 18%. The company had burned through its cash reserves, and analysts were openly speculating about bankruptcy. An emergency board meeting was called, and the atmosphere in that 47th floor boardroom was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed. Preston Whitmore stood at the head of the table, his face flushed with anger and fear, presenting a turnaround plan that even Marcus could tell was pure desperation dressed up in expensive slides. The board members were furious. They interrupted constantly. They demanded answers that Preston couldn't provide. And then, something remarkable happened. Eleanor Vance, the longest-serving board member at 78 years old and one of the few people who had known Gerald Morrison personally, stopped the meeting cold. She looked directly at Preston and said that she had been on this board for 35 years. She had seen good leaders and bad leaders. She had watched this company survive recessions and scandals and transformations. But she had never seen leadership as incompetent as what she was witnessing now. Preston responded with his usual arrogance. He insisted that nobody in this room could do better given the circumstances. He challenged them directly. He said, if anyone thinks they can do better, go ahead, take the floor, tell me your brilliant plan to save this company. The room fell silent. Board members shifted uncomfortably in their leather chairs. These were powerful people, titans of industry in their own right, but none of them had a real solution. They had critique in abundance, but answers in short supply. And that's when Eleanor Vance did something that would go down in corporate legend. She didn't look at the board members. She didn't look at the executives. She turned her head slowly, deliberately, toward the corner of the room, toward the man in the white jacket holding the silver tray, toward Marcus Ellington. For a moment, everyone thought she was simply going to ask for more water. But Eleanor had noticed Marcus over the years in ways that others hadn't. She had seen him reading financial journals when he thought no one was watching. She had caught glimpses of handwritten notes filled with numbers and analyses. She had sensed, without fully understanding, that there was more to this man than met the eye. Eleanor looked directly at Marcus and asked if he had something to say. The entire room turned to stare at the butler. Some looked confused. Some looked annoyed. Preston Whitmore actually laughed out loud. A butler? You want the butler to weigh in on a billion-dollar company's survival strategy? This is absurd. But Eleanor didn't back down. She said she had known Gerald Morrison for decades. Gerald had impeccable judgment about people. He hired this man for a reason. She suggested they at least hear what he has to say. Preston's face twisted into a smirk that combined condescension with cruel amusement. He turned to Marcus and delivered those 5 words that would change everything. If you can speak to the board, I'll step down. He laughed again. He thought he was being clever. He thought he was calling a bluff that didn't exist. He thought that Marcus would stammer and apologize and retreat back into his corner where invisible people belonged. Preston Whitmore III had made many mistakes in his life, but underestimating Marcus Ellington would prove to be his greatest and his last. What happened next would be recounted for years in business schools, leadership seminars, and corporate boardrooms around the world. Marcus Ellington set down his silver tray on the credenza behind him. He removed his white serving jacket and folded it neatly, revealing a crisp dress shirt beneath. He straightened his posture, and in that moment, the invisible man became visible for the first time in 27 years. When he walked toward the head of the table, his footsteps echoed in the stunned silence. When he turned to face the board, every eye in the room was fixed upon him. And when he spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and filled with a quiet authority that commanded instant attention. He introduced himself properly for the first time. He said his name was Marcus Ellington. He said he had served this company for 27 years. He said he had poured their coffee and cleaned their tables and stood in their corners while they discussed the fate of this organization. He said they had never asked his opinion. He said they had never wondered if he had anything to offer beyond hospitality. He said that today, for the first time, someone had asked. And he had quite a lot to say. For the next 90 minutes, Marcus delivered a presentation that left the board members speechless. He didn't use slides. He didn't need them. Everything he knew, and he knew everything, was stored in that remarkable mind that had spent decades observing, analyzing, and understanding every facet of Harrington Industries. He started with the numbers. He recited revenue figures, profit margins, and cash flow statements from memory going back 15 years. He identified exactly when and where the decline had begun. He pointed to specific decisions, specific executives, specific moments when the company had veered off course. But he didn't just critique. He offered solutions. Detailed, comprehensive, actionable solutions that addressed every major problem the company faced. He explained that the manufacturing division in Ohio was operating at only 62% capacity because the production scheduling software hadn't been updated since 2008. He noted that implementing a modern system would increase output by at least 25% within 6 months. He described how the company was losing $14 million annually on redundant distribution centers in the Southeast. He said consolidating these facilities would generate immediate cost savings while improving delivery times. He identified that customer satisfaction scores had been declining steadily because of a policy change 3 years ago that reduced warranty coverage. He explained that reversing this decision would cost approximately $2 million, but would prevent the estimated $40 million in lost revenue from customer defection. On and on he went. Every problem had a solution. Every challenge had an opportunity hidden within it. And every statement he made was backed by data that he had accumulated over nearly 3 decades of silent observation. The board members began taking notes frantically. They asked questions, and Marcus answered each one with precision and depth that demonstrated mastery far beyond anything they had expected. Preston Whitmore sat frozen in his chair, his face shifting from smirk to confusion to pale realization that he had just destroyed his own career with 5 foolish words. When Marcus finally finished, the room sat in absolute silence for a full 30 seconds. Then Eleanor Vance began to clap, slowly at first, then with genuine enthusiasm. Other board members joined in until the entire room was applauding the butler who had just delivered the most brilliant strategic presentation in the company's history. Eleanor Vance turned to Preston Whitmore with a cold smile and reminded him of his words. "If you can speak to the board, I'll step down." She asked if he would like to make that resignation official now, or if he would prefer they vote on it. Preston tried to protest. He stammered that this was ridiculous, and that you cannot just hand a company over to a butler based on one presentation. But the board had seen enough. They had witnessed 2 very different kinds of leadership in that room. One built on privilege and arrogance. One built on knowledge and humility. The choice was clear. By unanimous vote, Preston Whitmore III was removed as CEO effective immediately. And by the same unanimous vote, Marcus Ellington was appointed interim CEO pending a formal review process. The butler had taken the floor, and the floor had become his. What Marcus Ellington accomplished over the next 18 months would become the subject of Harvard Business Review case studies and countless books about leadership and organizational transformation. He didn't just stop the bleeding at Harrington Industries. He led one of the most remarkable corporate turnarounds in American business history. In his first week as CEO, Marcus held town hall meetings with employees at every level of the organization. From factory workers to middle managers to senior executives, he listened to their concerns, asked about their ideas, and made them feel seen in ways they never had before. When workers at the Ohio manufacturing plant shared their frustration about outdated equipment, Marcus personally toured the facility and approved a comprehensive modernization plan within 30 days. When customer service representatives explained that they lacked the authority to actually solve problems, Marcus restructured the department to give frontline employees real decision-making power. He led by example in ways that shocked people who expected a traditional corporate executive. He arrived at headquarters at 6 in the morning and often stayed past midnight. He knew the names of secretaries and security guards and cafeteria workers. He sent handwritten notes to employees who went above and beyond. And perhaps most remarkably, he continued to pour his own coffee and clean up after himself, never forgetting where he came from or what it felt like to be invisible. The results spoke for themselves. Within 6 months, employee satisfaction scores had increased by 42%. Customer complaints dropped by 37%. Operational efficiency improved across every division. And the stock price, which had been in freefall for years, began to climb steadily upward. By the end of Marcus's first full year as CEO, Harrington Industries had returned to profitability for the first time in half a decade. Analysts who had been predicting bankruptcy were now calling it the comeback of the decade. And Marcus Ellington, the butler who was never supposed to speak, was being invited to give keynote addresses at conferences around the world. But what Marcus did with his newfound platform mattered even more than the financial turnaround. He used his position to advocate for the overlooked and underestimated people in every organization. He created scholarship programs for first-generation college students. He established mentorship initiatives connecting executives with employees from disadvantaged backgrounds. He implemented blind hiring practices to reduce bias and open pathways for advancement that hadn't existed before. In interviews, Marcus often spoke about what he called the invisible workforce. He talked about the millions of people in every organization who have ideas and abilities and potential that go untapped because nobody thinks to ask them anything beyond their job description. He argued that the greatest resource any company possesses isn't its technology or its capital. It's the collective intelligence of every single person who walks through its doors. And most organizations are wasting 90% of that intelligence because they've decided in advance whose voices matter and whose don't. Marcus Ellington's story spread far beyond the walls of Harrington Industries. It became a cultural phenomenon that resonated with people around the world who had ever felt overlooked, undervalued, or invisible in their own lives. News outlets picked up the story with headlines calling it the butler who became CEO and the man who was too smart to stay silent. But the most powerful response came from ordinary people who saw themselves in Marcus's journey. Emails poured in by the thousands. Factory workers wrote about finding courage to share ideas with their supervisors. Administrative assistants described finally speaking up in meetings after years of staying quiet. Immigrants shared stories about their own expertise being dismissed because of accents or unfamiliar credentials. Parents wrote about teaching their children that being overlooked doesn't mean being without worth. Marcus read every single email, and he responded to as many as he could, often late at night when the office was empty and he had time to give each message the attention it deserved. One letter in particular touched him deeply. It came from a janitor at a hospital in Cleveland who wrote that he had worked at that hospital for 23 years. He wrote that he had ideas about improving patient flow and reducing wait times, ideas he had developed from 2 decades of observing how the hospital actually worked. But he had never said anything, because who listens to the janitor? Then he saw Marcus's story and decided to write a letter to the hospital administrator. He was invited to present his ideas to a committee. 3 of his suggestions were implemented, resulting in an average wait time reduction of 18%. The janitor finished his letter by saying that Marcus didn't just change his own company. He gave permission to every invisible person in America to believe they might have something worth saying too. This ripple effect became Marcus's greatest legacy. Not the financial turnaround, though that was impressive. Not the awards and accolades, though those came in abundance. But the cultural shift he helped spark in how organizations think about the untapped potential in their midst. He coined a phrase that became widely quoted in leadership circles. He said that every organization is sitting on a gold mine of intelligence that it's been trained to ignore. The question isn't whether that intelligence exists. The question is whether leaders have the humility to recognize it and the wisdom to invite it in. 3 years after taking over as CEO, Marcus Ellington announced his retirement at the age of 66. The company he left behind was unrecognizable from the struggling enterprise he had inherited. Revenue had more than doubled. The stock price had increased by 300%. And Harrington Industries was once again considered one of the most admired companies in America. But Marcus didn't retire to a life of leisure and luxury. He had a different plan. He used a significant portion of his executive compensation to establish the Morrison-Ellington Foundation, named in honor of both Gerald Morrison, who had given him a chance, and his own parents who had taught him the value of dignity in all work. The foundation's mission was simple but powerful. It provided educational opportunities, mentorship, and advancement pathways for people from overlooked backgrounds who possessed intelligence and potential that traditional systems failed to recognize. Within 2 years, the foundation had helped more than 5,000 individuals pursue degrees, launch businesses, and advance into leadership positions they never would have accessed otherwise. Marcus spent his retirement years traveling the country and speaking at community centers, schools, and organizations about the power of perseverance and the importance of seeing potential in unexpected places. He never forgot what it felt like to be invisible, and he dedicated the rest of his life to ensuring that others wouldn't have to feel that way for as long as he did. On the 10th anniversary of that fateful board meeting, Marcus returned to Harrington Industries headquarters for a special ceremony. The company had commissioned a portrait to hang in the main lobby. But it wasn't the typical executive portrait in a designer suit behind a mahogany desk. Instead, the painting showed Marcus in his butler's white jacket, holding a silver tray, with a slight smile that suggested he knew something that everyone else was just beginning to understand. Beneath the portrait, a plaque bore a simple inscription that would inspire everyone who passed through those doors for generations to come. It read, Marcus Ellington. He served this company for 27 years before he led it. Never underestimate the person in the corner. They might be waiting for someone to ask what they think.